I exhausted my life savings to pay for my daughter's wedding. But my son-in-law twisted this act of love into a tool for humiliation, mocking my sacrifice in his toast in front of 300 guests. I simply smiled, swallowing the bitter taste of my anger. In a stunning turn of events, the groom's uncle, upon hearing my name, nearly choked on his drink and seized the microphone. What he revealed next brought my son-in-law to his knees in tears and flipped the entire evening on its head. The tea in my mug had turned tepid at least 20 minutes ago, but I continued to grip the porcelain as if it were a lifeline. My daughter, Chloe, was pacing by my kitchen window, the sharp, impatient clicks of her designer heels echoing on the worn linoleum. Her fiancé, Mark, was sprawled across my late husband's old recliner as if he owned it, the expensive watch on his wrist, glinting in the lamplight with every dismissive gesture. "Eleanor," he began, his tone suggesting he was doing me a favor. "We need to have a serious conversation." Chloe stopped her pacing, her voice coated in that forced sweetness she always used when she was about to ask for something significant. "Mom, we need to talk about the wedding." "Really significant then?" I carefully set my mug down on the coaster, steeling myself for whatever was coming. "What's on your mind, sweetheart?" Mark leaned forward, a practiced, charming smile spreading across his face that never quite reached his eyes. "Eleanor, we've run the numbers. For the wedding we envision, we're going to need $60,000. The words felt like a physical blow. 60. 0. My monthly pension as a retired teacher was just enough to cover my mortgage, groceries, and utilities, with very little left over. I felt a familiar tension creep into my shoulders as I struggled to comprehend the scale of their request. "Kids," I started gently. "I don't have that kind of money just sitting around." Chloe immediately whirled around, her eyes already welling up with practiced tears. "Mom, this is my only chance to have a perfect wedding. Mark's family is very well connected. There will be important people there. I can't have it look like we cut corners. Honey, I understand that weddings are a huge expense, but $60,000. Other mothers would do anything to make their daughters happy." Mark's voice had lost its charm, turning cold and calculating. "My Uncle Arthur always says that a family's true measure is how they show up for each other's most important moments." I watched my daughter's face crumple on cue. She sank into a kitchen chair, letting the crocodile tears flow without restraint. It was the same manipulation she'd perfected in her teenage years, only now she had an accomplice. "Mom, if you truly love me, you'll figure it out. I've been dreaming of this day since I was a little girl. Don't you remember when I would play dress-up in your old wedding dress?" The mention of my wedding dress, the one I had shared so many happy memories in with her late father, twisted a painful knot deep inside my chest. David would have wanted nothing more than our daughter's happiness, but he also would have seen straight through this emotional blackmail. "Chloe, you know I would do anything for you, but I'm on a fixed income. I have maybe $35,000 in savings, and that's meant to be my safety net for the rest of my life." "$35,000 is a good start," Mark interjected, already tapping away on his phone. "You could get a loan for the other 25. Banks are always happy to lend to pensioners with a steady income." "Mark, I'm 65 years old. Taking on new debt at my age it's what loving mothers do." Chloe's voice cracked with theatrical emotion. "Dad would have found a way. He always believed in making dreams come true." The room suddenly felt suffocating, their expectations pressing in on me from every direction. I looked at Chloe's tear-streaked face, at Mark's smug, expectant stare, and at the small pile of bills on my counter that I had yet to pay. I can look into it. I'll see what I can do." Chloe flew across the room, wrapping her arms around my neck in a suffocating embrace. "Oh, Mom, I knew you wouldn't let me down. You're the best mother in the entire world." Mark stood up, smoothing down the front of his expensive jacket. "We'll need the funds confirmed by the end of next week. The venue won't hold our date without a substantial deposit." They gathered their belongings in a hurry, Chloe already chattering excitedly about floral arrangements and photographers, while Mark scrolled through messages on his phone. Within moments, they were gone, leaving behind only the faint scent of her perfume and the crushing weight of their demands. I sat alone in my kitchen, staring at the old calculator I had retrieved from a junk drawer. 35. 0 in savings. Another. 25. 0 needed. The numbers swam before my eyes as I tried to grasp the reality of what I had just agreed to. Outside, the sound of their car's engine faded, and the house returned to its usual quiet. I picked up my cold teacup, set it down, and then reached for the phone book to find the number for City Trust Bank. My hands were trembling. After they departed, the house seemed to shrink, as if the walls themselves had absorbed their demands and were now closing in on me. I laid out all my financial documents on the kitchen table. Bank statements, pension paperwork, and the ever-present stack of bills. The calculator's digital display was stark and unforgiving. 34, 850, 2.18. That was my entire life savings. I re-entered the numbers, a foolish hope flickering that they might somehow change. They didn't. Sleep was elusive that night. I drifted off in my recliner, only to be jolted awake by a mind racing with frantic calculations. 25. 0 loan at my age. The bedroom felt cavernous and empty without David there to talk things through with. So I remained in the living room, watching late-night infomercials pitch miracle solutions to people who felt as lost as I did. By the time the sun rose, I had made my peace with the decision. The downtown branch of City Trust Bank looked just as imposing as it had 30 years ago when I opened my first account. The polished marble floors amplified the sound of every footstep, and the brass railings gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights. Clutching a folder filled with my financial history, I approached the customer service desk. "I'd like to speak with someone about a personal loan." A young woman offered a professional, impersonal smile. "Of course, ma'am. I'll get you set up with Ms. Williams in our lending department." Jessica Williams looked younger than my daughter Chloe, with a disarming smile and a confident handshake. Her office was compact but tidy, with photos of her family arranged neatly next to her computer. "How can I help you today, Mrs. Croft? I need to borrow $25,000. The words came out with more steadiness than I felt. "It's for my daughter's wedding." She pulled up my account, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "I see you've been a loyal customer for a very long time, Mrs. Croft. Your pension deposits are as regular as clockwork. What is your timeline for needing the funds?" "As soon as possible. They need to make deposits within the week." Jessica nodded, jotting notes on a legal pad. "With your excellent credit score and long history with us, we can certainly make that happen. The interest rate would be 8.2%. And we could structure the repayments over 6 years to keep the monthly amount manageable." 6 years. I would be 71 when the loan was finally paid off, assuming I was still around. But Chloe's face, etched with what I had mistaken for desperate hope, floated in my mind. What would the monthly payments be? Approximately $495 a month. It was more than my budget for groceries and utilities combined. It would mean cutting back on everything, eliminating any small comforts, and living a bare-bones existence until the debt was clear. I'll take it. The paperwork took the better part of an hour. There were forms to fill out, signatures to provide, and endless disclosures about interest rates and penalties for late fees. Jessica guided me through each document with patience, likely accustomed to older clients who needed a bit more time to process such life-altering financial commitments. "The funds will be in your account by Friday morning, Mrs. Croft." I thanked her and walked back to my car, a strange mix of relief and dread washing over me. I felt lighter because I had secured what Chloe wanted, yet heavier because I had just signed away my financial security for a single day of celebration. The drive home took me past the community college, Where I had taught history for over 30 years, I watched students hurry across the campus, their backpacks slung over their shoulders, their entire lives stretching out before them. I had been their age once, filled with dreams that felt entirely within reach. 30 years of dedicating my life to education. And what did I have to show for it? A pension that was barely enough to live on, and a daughter who seemed to view me as little more than a bank account, but that felt uncharitable. Chloe loved me. I was sure of it. Sometimes, love just gets twisted up with wants and expectations. David used to say I was too soft on her, always caving whenever she pushed. Perhaps he had been right. Friday morning arrived with an email notification. Deposit processed. 25-0. I stared at the screen for a long time before picking up the phone to call Chloe. Mom. Perfect timing. I was just going over floral arrangements with the wedding planner. Honey, can you and Mark come over this afternoon? I have some good news for you about the wedding funds. Her shriek of delight nearly deafened me. Oh my gosh. Yes, of course. We'll be there at 3. Mom, you're a lifesaver. I hung up the phone and looked around my simple living room. In just a few hours, I would hand over their dream, and, in doing so, seal my own financial fate. The gravity of my choice settled in my chest like a stone, but it was far too late for regrets. The morning stretched before me, humming with nervous energy as I prepared for what was to come. They arrived precisely at 3:00 p.m. Chloe was practically vibrating with excitement, hugging me tightly at the door. Mark followed, carrying a leather-bound planner that likely cost more than my entire monthly pension. Chloe perched on the edge of the sofa, her eyes wide with anticipation. Okay, Mom, don't keep us in suspense. I settled into my recliner, the folded bank documents in my lap. I was able to secure the funding. All $60,000. Mark raised an eyebrow, a flicker of genuine surprise in his eyes. How did you pull that off? I liquidated my savings. And I took out a personal loan for the rest, I said, trying to keep my voice even, as if taking on a massive debt at 65 was the most normal thing in the world. The money is there for all your wedding expenses. Chloe launched herself at me again, this time with tears of genuine joy, instead of manipulation. Mom, I can't believe you did this for us. We're going to have the most beautiful wedding. Mark's family is going to be so impressed. There's just one condition. The words came out more quietly than I had intended, but they both heard me. Mark's expression shifted, a familiar weariness clouding his features. What kind of condition? I want to invite one person. Someone who is very important to me, and who I believe should be there to witness this moment. Chloe pulled away, her joy replaced by confusion. Who, Mom? This is our wedding. The guest list has been finalized with the venue and the caterer. I know, but this is important. It's just one extra person. Mark leaned forward, his professional instincts taking over. Listen, Eleanor, we appreciate the money. We really do. But we get to decide who comes. That's how this works. It's for family and our closest friends. This person is like family, in a way, I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. Someone who has been a part of my life for longer than either of you. Chloe stood up and began to pace. Mom, don't be so selfish. This is supposed to be about Mark and me, not about some mystery guest of yours. I'm not asking for much. Just one seat at a table, one meal that is already being paid for with my money. Money that we're very grateful for, Mark interjected smoothly. But that gratitude doesn't give you a controlling interest. Our wedding, our rules. The coldness in his voice was unmistakable. I looked at my daughter, hoping for a glimmer of support, but her expression had hardened into that stubborn mask I knew so well. Mom, we can't just add people at the last minute. Do you have any idea what goes into creating a seating chart? The caterer needs a final head count. The venue has strict capacity limits. One person won't. It's not about one person. Chloe's voice rose to a shrill pitch I hadn't heard since her teenage tantrums. It's about you trying to use your money to control our day. That's manipulative and selfish. The irony of being called manipulative, after their carefully orchestrated performance just a few days prior, was not lost on me. A cold dread settled in my stomach as I watched them present a united front against me. Mark stood, adjusting the jacket of his expensive suit. Here's how this is going to work. We are going to accept your generous gift, and we are going to plan the wedding we've always wanted, with the guests we have chosen. If you have a problem with that, then perhaps you shouldn't come at all. Mark! Chloe looked momentarily shocked, but then her expression softened into something far worse. Pity. Mom, he didn't mean that. But you have to try to understand. This is our day. We just can't have it derailed by your personal agenda. I sat in my recliner, looking up at the two people for whom I had just sacrificed my future, and I saw strangers, entitled, cold strangers, who viewed my sacrifice as their right, and my one small request as an outrageous demand. I'm not asking for much, I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. You're asking for something that is not yours to ask for, Mark said, grabbing his planner. Come on, Chloe. We have appointments with vendors. Chloe hesitated, her gaze shifting between us. For a fleeting second, I thought she might choose me, her mother, over her fiancé. Then, she picked up her designer purse and followed him to the door. Mom, just think about what we said. Please don't make this more difficult than it needs to be. The front door clicked shut behind them, the sound as final as a vault being sealed. I sat in the suffocating silence, surrounded by the echoes of their demands and the sting of their dismissal. $60,000, and I couldn't even invite one person to see how it was spent. The bank documents lay on the floor where they had fallen during our argument. I bent down to retrieve them, my knees groaning with the effort. Outside, their car engine revved, and then faded into the distance, carrying my money and my dignity away with it. For the first time since David's passing, I felt utterly and completely alone. Mark stepped closer, his overpowering cologne filling the stale air of my living room. You really think that just because you're paying, you get to control our special day? I remained in my chair, my hands gripping the worn fabric of the armrests. I'm not asking for control. I'm asking for one guest who means the world to me. Means the world to you? Chloe's voice was dripping with disbelief. What about what means the world to us? To our future? Your future that I am now funding? The words escaped before I could stop them. Mark's eyes narrowed, and I watched my daughter's face flush with indignation. Funding? She let out a short, humorless laugh. Mom, you're not funding anything. You're giving a gift to your only daughter on the most important day of her life. That's what mothers are supposed to do. Exactly. Mark crossed his arms, the wedding band on his finger catching the light. This isn't some business deal, Eleanor. This is about family. Family? The word stung more than I could have anticipated. I looked around my modest living room, at the same furniture David and I had picked out together 30 years ago. At the family photos on the mantelpiece where Chloe smiled at me with what I once believed was real love. At the coffee table marred with faint scars from years of board games. If this is family, I said quietly, then why can't I invite one person who is important to me? Chloe threw her hands up in exasperation. Because it's not about you. Why can't you understand that? This is Mark's and my day. Our friends. Our choices. Our celebration. Paid for with my sacrifice. Sacrifice? Mark's laugh was harsh and grating. You mean your obligation, your privilege to be a part of your daughter's happiness. A profound coldness settled deep in my chest. These were not the words of grateful children. These were the demands of entitled strangers, who saw my contribution not as a gift, but as their due. I emptied my life savings, I said, my voice gaining a strength I didn't know I had. I took out a loan that I will be paying off for years. I did all of this so that you could have your perfect wedding. Asking to invite one guest seems more than reasonable. Chloe's tears started flowing again, right on cue. Now you're trying to guilt trip us. You're trying to make us feel bad for accepting your gift. Gift? The word was sharp. Chloe, this isn't a gift. This is me mortgaging my future so that you can impress people who don't even know that I exist. Mark moved to Chloe's side, his arm sliding around her waist in a protective gesture. Listen carefully, Eleanor. We appreciate your financial contribution, but appreciation does not equal a surrender of our autonomy. We will decide the guest list. We will decide the atmosphere. We will decide every single detail of our wedding. And if I can't accept that, they exchanged a quick, calculating glance. When Mark turned back to me, his expression had hardened into something I had never seen before. Then perhaps you don't need to be involved at all. The silence that followed was a vast, empty chasm between us. I stared at my daughter, waiting, pleading with her to contradict him, to defend me, to remember the 32 years of love and sacrifice. Instead, she just nodded. Mom, if you can't just be happy for us without trying to control everything, then maybe Mark is right. Maybe it's best if you just step back. Step back? From my own daughter's wedding? From the very celebration I was funding with money I didn't have? I rose slowly from my chair, my old knees protesting the movement. I see. Mark grabbed his planner, his movements sharp with irritation. Good. I'm glad we've reached an understanding. At the door, Chloe hesitated, looking back at me with an expression that might have been regret. Mom, you can still come to the wedding. Just don't make it about you. Don't make it about me. The woman paying $60,000 for the event shouldn't make it about herself. They left without another word. The soft click of the closing door, sounding devastatingly final. I stood alone in my living room, enveloped by the silence they left in their wake, and crushed by the weight of their contempt. The bank documents were scattered on the rug where they'd fallen. I bent to collect them, my eyes scanning the terms I'd agreed to. $495 a month for 72 months. 25, 0+ years of interest, to be paid by a 71-year-old woman on a fixed income. Also, my daughter could tell me to step back from her life. For the first time since my husband's funeral, I felt truly and profoundly abandoned. The weeks that followed were a blur of muted colors and strained conversations. April arrived, bringing with it the usual promise of spring renewal. But within our family, something had withered and died beyond any hope of repair. My phone rang far less often. When Chloe did call, our conversations were stripped of all warmth, reduced to logistical necessities, caterer deposits, venue confirmations, vendor payments. It was never about my input or preferences. It was always about the money. Mom, we need the deposit for the florist by Thursday. Her voice was as brisk and efficient as a project manager's. $3,000 should cover the arrangements we've chosen. I didn't bother asking what the arrangements were. After the humiliating incident at the high-end floral boutique, where my suggestion for simpler, more elegant centerpieces was met with Chloe's visible embarrassment, I had learned to keep my opinions to myself. The ones you like are fine, I'd said that day, listening as the florist quoted prices that made my entire monthly pension seem like pocket change. Chloe had exchanged a knowing look with Mark, that familiar eye roll they reserved for their out-of-touch mother. Mom, your taste is just a little different from the aesthetic we're going for. Different. That word seemed to follow me through every subsequent vendor meeting. I became a silent financial resource in an expensive new dress I'd bought for the occasion, sitting quietly with my checkbook, while the professionals addressed all their questions to the happy couple. The caterer's tasting room smelled of garlic and rosemary, but even those delightful aromas couldn't mask the bitter taste of being utterly ignored. Mark and Chloe spread menu options across a large table, pointing to selections that cost more per plate than my entire weekly grocery budget. "We just don't want to look cheap in front of our guests," Chloe explained to the caterer, as if I wasn't sitting just 3 feet away. "Quality is far more important than budget." An easy sentiment to express when it's someone else's budget you're spending. By the middle of April, my exclusion had become systematic. Wedding planning meetings were scheduled without my knowledge. My input was replaced by cheerful, hurried summaries delivered over the phone. "Everything's going perfectly, Mom. The venue coordinator absolutely loves our vision." Our vision. Never mine. Always theirs. One afternoon, I drove to the Hawthorne estate by myself, overcome by a morbid curiosity to see where my $60,000 was being spent. The ballroom was breathtakingly elegant. Crystal chandeliers dripped from the high ceilings, the marble floors were polished to a mirror shine, and floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the manicured gardens. It was beautiful and astronomically expensive, exactly what they wanted. The event coordinator, a poised woman named Emily, gave me a tour with professional courtesy. "Your daughter and her fiancé have impeccable taste. This is going to be one of our most magnificent celebrations of the season." I simply nodded, picturing Chloe in her gown and Mark in his tuxedo, surrounded by 300 guests who would never have any idea of the profound sacrifice that made their perfect day possible. "Are you excited for the wedding?" Emily asked, as we concluded the tour. Excited was not the word I would have used. Resigned, perhaps. Melancholy, certainly. "It will be beautiful," I said instead. The meeting to select the music was my final, futile attempt to participate. I arrived at the DJ studio armed with a short list of suggestions, songs that David and I had danced to, timeless classics that held deep meaning for our family. Mark listened to my first suggestion for no more than 30 seconds before waving his hand dismissively. "This is our generation's wedding, Eleanor, not yours. We want the music to reflect who we are." And who they were, apparently, had absolutely no connection to where they came from. Late April delivered the final insult, cleverly disguised as a thoughtful gesture. Chloe called on a Tuesday evening, her voice artificially bright and cheerful. "Mom, we've decided to handle all the remaining details ourselves. You've already done so much, and we just don't want to burden you with all the little last-minute decisions." The little decisions. Like whether the mother funding the entire event would have any voice at all. "We'll take it from here," she continued breezily. "All you need to do is show up and enjoy the party. Show up like a guest at someone else's event." Which, I was beginning to realize, was exactly what I had become. In early May, a formal invitation arrived in my mailbox. It was addressed to Mrs. Eleanor Croft in elegant, swirling calligraphy. No mention of mother of the bride. No special honorific. Just another name on a long list of 300 people invited to witness the spectacle my sacrifice had built. The invitation sat on my kitchen table for 3 days before I could bring myself to open it, already knowing what I would find inside. The cardstock was thick and luxurious, the printing flawless, the grammar perfect. It requested the honor of my presence at their celebration. My presence, not my blessing, not my joy, just my attendance at an event where I would be as invisible as I had been throughout the entire planning process. I RSVP'd with a single word: attending. The morning of May 10th dawned with offensively perfect weather. A cloudless sky, a gentle breeze, and temperatures in the mid-70s. The kind of day David would have called heaven sent for a wedding. I dressed with care in my best suit, the same one I had worn to countless parent-teacher conferences and to Chloe's college graduation. The woman who looked back at me from the mirror seemed older than her 65 years. her face etched with the lines of recent rejection and financial anxiety. Grace Chapel stood on the corner of 5th and Elm, its historic spires reaching toward that perfect blue sky. The parking lot was already filling up with cars when I arrived at 1:30. A full 30 minutes before the ceremony was due to begin. I recognized none of them. They were expensive, luxury vehicles that spoke of their owners' elevated social standing. Inside, the church was a blaze of flowers. White roses and lilies cascaded from every surface, their heavy perfume mingling with the scent of old wood and candle wax. My $3,000 had certainly bought a spectacle. "You can sit anywhere you'd like," a young usher told me, gesturing vaguely toward the crowded pews. I had always assumed I would be in the front row, the traditional place for the mother of the bride. Instead, I found myself guided toward the back, behind clusters of chattering guests, who were whispering excitedly about the ceremony. The front rows were reserved for people I had never seen before. Mark's colleagues, Chloe's co-workers, and friends from their exclusive social circle. The second row appeared to be reserved for Mark's extended family, including a distinguished-looking older man who seemed to command an air of respect and deference from everyone around him. That must be Arthur Vance, I realized. Mark's uncle, the successful restaurateur who had built a small empire from the ground up. He was the man whose approval clearly mattered far more than mine. The organ music swelled as the processional began. Mark took his place at the altar, looking handsome and confident in his tailored tuxedo, flanked by groomsmen who looked like they had been plucked from a magazine advertisement. Then Chloe appeared at the back of the church, and despite all my hurt, I had to admit she was radiant. Her gown flowed around her like liquid starlight, the intricate beadwork catching the light from the stained glass windows. My little girl, a beautiful woman about to begin a new chapter of her life. She walked down the aisle alone, her bouquet of white roses held steady in her hands. There was no mother to escort her, no acknowledgement of the woman who had raised her, loved her, and sacrificed everything for this very moment. Over the years, I had pictured this walk 1,000 times. In my dreams, she held my arm tightly, her eyes filled with happy tears, whispering how much she loved me as we made our way to the altar together. Instead, she glided past my pew without a single glance, her eyes fixed solely on Mark, who was waiting for her. The ceremony itself was beautiful. The officiant spoke of love, commitment, and the importance of honoring one's parents while building a new family. Chloe and Mark exchanged vows they had written themselves, their voices clear and strong as they promised devotion and partnership. "I promise to honor the family that shaped you," Mark said with unwavering confidence, "and to build a new family that reflects our shared love. Honor the family that shaped her." The words were a bitter irony, echoing through the church, while the woman who had actually shaped her sat invisible in a back pew. Rings were exchanged, traditional words were spoken, and finally, the officiant pronounced them husband and wife. Mark kissed Chloe as thunderous applause filled the sanctuary, the flashes of cameras capturing their perfect moment for posterity. Through it all, I sat in silence, a witness to the celebration my sacrifice had paid for, surrounded by strangers who would never know the true cost of their beautiful afternoon. As the recessional began and the wedding party made their way back up the aisle, I caught Chloe's eye for a brief second. She smiled a brilliant, genuine, happy smile. But it wasn't for me. It was the radiant, all-encompassing smile of a bride on her perfect day. A smile she shared with everyone, and no one in particular. The guests began to file out, their conversations buzzing with compliments about how lovely everything was, how perfect the couple looked, how elegant the ceremony had been. "Such a beautiful wedding," a woman behind me remarked. "They clearly spared no expense at all." I joined the throng of people moving toward the church doors, where Chloe and Mark were forming a receiving line. I could have waited my turn, offered a perfunctory hug to the bride, and a handshake to the groom. I could have added my voice to the chorus of well-wishers praising their perfect day. Instead, I found a side exit and slipped out, walking to my car and following the stream of traffic toward the Hawthorne estate, where the next act of this performance would unfold. 300 guests, ready to celebrate love and new beginnings with premium food, top-shelf liquor, and live music. All of it paid for by a woman who had become a stranger at her own daughter's wedding. The drive to the Hawthorne estate was only 15 minutes, but it felt like an eternity. I followed the procession of luxury vehicles through the city's historic district, my modest sedan feeling utterly out of place among the BMWs and Mercedes-Benzes, owned by people who had never had to mortgage their futures for someone else's happiness. The estate rose before us, looking like a feature from an architectural magazine, with its limestone columns, sprawling gardens, and massive windows revealing the crystal chandeliers within. Every single detail screamed of expense, and my signature was on every single check. Guests poured through the grand entrance, their laughter echoing off the marble floors as they made their way to the ballroom for the cocktail hour. I entered alone, watching as friends and family naturally congregated around Chloe and Mark, who were holding court near the bar like royalty receiving their loyal subjects. "Eleanor!" Mark's voice, artificially warm, carried across the room. "Come over and meet some of our friends." I approached their circle with reluctance, recognizing the familiar setup of his tone. He had his arm wrapped possessively around Chloe's waist. They were both radiant, surrounded by a crowd of young, successful professionals who looked as though they'd been cast in a corporate recruitment video. "Everyone, this is my wonderful mother-in-law." Mark's smile was too wide, too practiced. A true hero. She actually took out a loan to ensure our happiness. The group turned to me with polite, curious smiles, their champagne flutes catching the light from the chandeliers. A woman in a designer dress smiled warmly. "Really? That is just so generous of you." "Oh, yes," Mark continued, his voice taking on that sharp edge I had come to dread. "She is completely committed to making our dreams come true. Aren't you, Eleanor?" The expectant faces surrounding me waited for my response. I could feel the weight of their collective attention, the social pressure to play along with Mark's cruel performance. "I just want my daughter to be happy," I said quietly. "Happy?" Mark laughed, raising his glass. "She has expensive taste apparently. But hey, that's what credit is for, right?" A ripple of laughter went through the group. It wasn't overtly malicious, but each chuckle felt like a tiny, sharp blade. These people had no concept of the cruelty masked as humor, no idea of the months of systematic humiliation that had culminated in this moment. "Mark," Chloe murmured, a hint of unease in her voice, but she made no move to stop him. "What? I'm just celebrating your mother's generosity," he said, turning back to his captivated audience. "Did you know she had to liquidate her entire life savings for tonight? Now that's what I call commitment." A man in an expensive-looking suit let out a low whistle. "Wow, that's some serious dedication." I felt a hot flush creep up my neck. All around us, the reception carried on. Servers circulated with hors d'oeuvres that cost more than my weekly food budget. Musicians tuned instruments for an evening of entertainment I had never requested, and flowers were arranged in elaborate designs I had never approved. "Of course," Mark pressed on, emboldened by the attention. "She tried to attach some conditions at first. Can you believe it? She wanted to control our guest list, just because she was paying." "Really?" The woman in the designer dress seemed genuinely shocked. "What kind of conditions?" Mark's eyes glittered with malicious glee. "Oh, she had some mystery person she was desperate to invite. Someone important to her. As if our wedding was about anyone other than Chloe and me." The group murmured their understanding, nodding along with Mark's carefully crafted narrative. In their eyes, he was the reasonable groom, protecting his special day from an overbearing mother-in-law. Not a cruel son-in-law humiliating the woman who had sacrificed everything for their celebration. "Well," the man in the suit said, "it sounds like you handled it perfectly. A wedding should always be about the couple." "Exactly," Mark beamed, draining his champagne glass. "Though I have to admit, having someone else foot the bill certainly makes everything a whole lot easier." More laughter. More casual cruelty disguised as appreciative banter. I stood there, a pained smile frozen on my face, enduring each comment like a physical blow, desperately trying to hold on to what little dignity I had left. Across the room, I saw staff preparing for the dinner service, arranging place cards at tables adorned with centerpieces that cost more than some people's monthly rent. Everything was beautiful, everything was perfect, and everything was paid for with borrowed money that I would be repaying until I was 71. "Speaking of which," Mark said, checking his watch, "my Uncle Arthur should be arriving any minute. Wait until you meet him. Now there's a man who truly knows how to celebrate family properly." His uncle, the mysterious Arthur Vance, I had heard so much about but had never met. The warmth in Mark's voice when he mentioned the man was genuine, a level of respect he had never once shown me. "He raised me after my parents passed away," Mark explained to the group. "Built a restaurant empire from absolutely nothing. A real success story." A success story, unlike the retired schoolteacher standing right in front of them. The group began to disperse as the call for dinner approached. But Mark's words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. I watched him move through the crowd, brimming with a confidence born of cruelty, eagerly anticipating his uncle's arrival, while simultaneously dismissing the woman who had made his entire perfect evening possible. Around me, 300 guests mingled, enjoying cocktails and conversation, completely unaware of the true cost of their champagne and caviar. But perhaps, I thought with a flicker of hope, that was about to change. 2 hours into the reception, the ballroom had settled into a rhythm of elegant sophistication. Guests drifted between their tables and the bar, their voices a pleasant hum beneath the sound of a string quartet I'd paid for but never selected. Mark kept checking his watch, his excitement building for something I couldn't yet comprehend. "He should be here any moment," he said to Chloe, adjusting his bow tie for the third time in 5 minutes. She squeezed his arm reassuringly. "Uncle Arthur will love everything." How could he not? I stood near the edge of the ballroom, nursing a glass of whiskey I couldn't really afford, observing the social dynamics I had funded but was not a part of. The bitter irony of being invisible at my own expense was not lost on me. Then, the energy in the room shifted. A distinguished man appeared in the grand doorway, and conversations faltered as heads turned in his direction. He carried himself with the quiet confidence of a person long accustomed to being the center of attention. He had silver hair, impeccably styled, an expensive suit that fit him perfectly, and sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to take in every detail of the room. Arthur Vance had arrived. Mark practically vibrated with excitement, abandoning his conversation mid-sentence to rush toward his uncle. I watched their reunion, a warm embrace, a display of genuine affection, the kind of familial bond I had once believed I shared with Chloe, before money and manipulation had poisoned it. "Everyone," Mark's voice boomed across the ballroom, "I want you all to meet my uncle Arthur Vance, the man who made me who I am today." The crowd seemed to press closer, drawn by the man's magnetic presence. Arthur accepted the attention graciously, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries with an easy charm. "Mark, you've outdone yourself," Arthur said, his appreciative gaze sweeping across the opulent ballroom. "This is truly magnificent." His voice carried the weight of authority, earned through decades of hard work and success. I found myself studying him from across the room, trying to understand what made this man so revered by my son-in-law. "Uncle Arthur, you're going to love meeting everyone," Mark beamed. "This is our dream wedding. Dreams have a way of coming true when you work hard enough for them," Arthur replied, though his eyes continued to scan the room with a businessman's meticulous attention to detail. A woman near me whispered to her friend, "That's Arthur Vance. He owns 5 of the best restaurants in the city. He must be worth millions." Worth millions. No wonder Mark afforded him a level of respect he had never offered me. The crowd naturally reconfigured itself around Arthur. Guests eager for an introduction to a man of his stature. He handled each interaction with practiced poise, asking thoughtful questions and remembering names with an impressive ease. "Mr. Vance," a young woman gushed, "we've heard so much about you. It's such an honor to meet you." "The honor is all mine," Arthur replied smoothly. "Any friend of Mark and Chloe is family to me." Family. The word had weight when he said it, a genuine meaning that transcended social pleasantry. I watched him interact with my daughter, treating her with a polite respect that I had once hoped for from her husband. Mark hovered nearby, basking in the reflected glory of his uncle's presence. He was transformed from a smug groom into an eager nephew, desperate to prove himself worthy of such an impressive role model. "Uncle Arthur," Mark said, guiding him toward the center of the room. "Let me tell you about some of the people here tonight. You'll appreciate this." I found myself drifting closer, drawn in despite myself, compelled to observe the family dynamic that clearly meant everything to Mark. Whatever Arthur Vance represented to my son-in-law, it was powerful enough to make him crave an approval he had never once sought from me. Arthur's eyes swept across the reception, taking in the expensive floral arrangements, the premium bar, the elegant table settings, all the details my credit cards had made possible. "This must have cost a fortune," he observed quietly to Mark. "Every penny was worth it," Mark replied with a flourish. "When you love someone, you spare no expense." No expense? As if he had personally paid for a single thing. I watched this exchange from the periphery, noting how Mark's entire demeanor shifted in his uncle's presence. The casual cruelty he had shown me was gone, replaced by an almost childlike eagerness for validation. "You've built something beautiful here," Arthur continued, placing a hand on Mark's shoulder. "Your parents would be so proud." The mention of Mark's deceased parents brought a flicker of genuine emotion to my son-in-law's face. Whatever tragedy had brought these 2 men together had clearly forged a bond deeper than I had ever realized. As the dinner hour approached, guests began to find their assigned tables. I found my place card at a table near the back of the room, close enough to see everything but far enough away to be easily forgotten. The seating chart was just another quiet confirmation of my position in this new family's hierarchy. Arthur naturally was seated at the head table with the bride and groom, holding court among the most important guests. From my distant vantage point, I could see Mark's animated conversation, his gestures growing more expansive as he told stories I couldn't hear but could easily imagine. The man who had raised him commanded a respect and attention that Mark had never offered me. Whatever was about to happen next, I sensed, would stem from that fundamental difference in how we were valued. And something told me the evening was about to get much more interesting. An hour after Arthur's arrival, Mark had transformed into someone I barely recognized. The calculated coldness he'd shown me for months was replaced by an animated energy as he basked in his uncle's approval. The combination proved to be dangerous. "Uncle Arthur," Mark said, his voice loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. "You know what's so funny about tonight?" Arthur was in the middle of cutting his filet mignon, the most expensive entree on the menu, which I had approved without ever seeing it. "What's that, son?" My mother-in-law thinks she can set conditions just because she's footing the bill. Several guests at nearby tables turned their attention to the conversation. Drawn in by Mark's theatrical tone, I felt my stomach clench as I recognized the familiar pattern. This was the setup for another round of public humiliation. Arthur paused, his fork hovering midair. "Conditions?" "Oh yes." Mark's voice rang with a disturbing enthusiasm. "Poor Eleanor. Over there." He gestured dismissively toward my table in the back. "She wanted to control our guest list. Can you even imagine?" I gripped my whiskey glass, my knuckles turning white, as I watched Arthur's expression shift from paternal pride to mild curiosity. He followed Mark's gesture, his eyes landing on me for the first time that evening. "She actually had the nerve to demand we invite some mystery person," Mark continued, warming to his theme. "Someone important to her. As if our wedding was about anyone but Chloe and me." Laughter rippled from the surrounding tables. Guests who had been enjoying their expensive dinners now had some free entertainment to go with their meal, all at my expense. "That does seem rather inappropriate," someone at a neighboring table commented. "Right?" Mark beamed, soaking in the validation. "I told her, this is our day, our celebration, our choices. Just because you're paying doesn't mean you get to be the puppet master." More laughter, more casual cruelty disguised as reasonable boundary setting. I sat frozen in my chair, watching my son-in-law perform for his beloved uncle, using my pain as his comedic material. Arthur's expression had grown more thoughtful, his businessman's instincts apparently sensing something amiss in the dynamic. "And she accepted that eventually?" Mark's confidence was soaring with each laugh and nod of approval from his audience. "She did, though I have to admit, it took some convincing. The poor woman had to take out a loan for all this luxury you see around you." He swept his arm dramatically across the ballroom, encompassing the crystal, the flowers, the 5-course meal being served by a professional waitstaff. "Alone?" Arthur's voice carried a new note I couldn't quite identify. "Oh yes, Eleanor Croft had to liquidate her entire savings and then borrow $25,000 just to afford her daughter's happiness." Mark's voice was laced with a cruel, mocking amusement. The name hit the air like a physical force. I watched Arthur's face change a subtle but unmistakable shift from mild interest to sharp, focused attention. His fork remained suspended halfway to his mouth as his mind processed what he had just heard. "What did you say her name was?" Arthur's voice was now quiet, tightly controlled. Mark, completely oblivious to the sudden change in his uncle's demeanor, continued his performance. "Eleanor Croft, a sweet old lady, really, just completely out of her depth with modern wedding expenses. I had to explain to her several times that this isn't the 1980s anymore. Quality celebrations require a serious investment." The laughter from the surrounding tables was beginning to sound strained and uncomfortable. Some of the guests were starting to recognize the sheer cruelty in Mark's words, the inappropriateness of mocking someone who had clearly sacrificed so much. But Mark, intoxicated by what he perceived as his uncle's rapt attention, pressed on. "The best part is, she still thinks she should have a say in how we spend her money. I had to set her straight about who really makes the decisions in this family." Arthur had gone completely still. His eyes were fixed on Mark, but the warmth and pride that had been there moments before had transformed into something much colder, much harder. "Eleanor Croft," Arthur repeated, his voice barely a whisper. "That's right," Mark said, raising his champagne glass in a mock toast. "Here's to mothers-in-law who know their place, writing checks and staying quiet." The surrounding tables erupted in a wave of uncomfortable laughter, but I saw several guests exchanging uneasy glances, their discomfort now palpable. Even Chloe looked uncertain, perhaps sensing that Mark had finally crossed a line she couldn't quite define. Arthur set his fork down with deliberate, precise slowness. His eyes found mine across the crowded ballroom, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. A flicker of recognition sparked in his expression, not just of my name, but of something deeper, more significant. Something that was about to change everything. As the evening settled into its final phase, with servers clearing dessert plates and guests lingering over coffee, the master of ceremonies tapped a champagne glass, calling for attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will now hear a toast from our groom, Mark." Mark practically leaped to his feet, his face flushed with wine and the intoxicating thrill of his uncle's presence. He strode to the microphone with the unshakable confidence of a man who believed he owned the room. completely unaware that his next words were about to shatter his entire world. "Thank you, everyone." His voice boomed through the sound system. "What an incredible evening we've shared." Polite applause rippled through the crowd. I sat at my distant table, bracing myself for whatever fresh humiliation he had planned. Arthur remained at the head table, his champagne glass untouched, his eyes fixed on his nephew with an expression I couldn't decipher. "I want to thank everyone who made this magical day possible," Mark continued, his voice taking on that familiar performative edge. "My beautiful bride, our wonderful friends, and especially..." He paused for dramatic effect, surveying the room like a comedian timing a punchline. "Especially my mother-in-law, who showed such remarkable dedication to our happiness." A few guests chuckled, unsure of how to react. Mark's smile widened, encouraged. "Seriously, folks, let me tell you about commitment. How many mothers would liquidate their entire life savings for their daughter's wedding?" More laughter, though I noticed several people shifting uncomfortably in their seats. "But that's not all." Mark raised his glass higher. "When that wasn't enough, this dedicated woman took out a personal loan at 65 years old." The laughter was becoming more forced now as guests began to see the cruelty beneath the thin veneer of gratitude. "Ladies and gentlemen, let's raise our glasses to Eleanor Croft, the woman who mortgaged her golden years for our golden day." I felt the familiar sting of public humiliation, but something had shifted in me over these months of systematic degradation. The shame felt distant now, replaced by a cold, hard clarity about who Mark truly was. "And the best part," Mark's voice rose with cruel enthusiasm, "is how gracious she was about our little disagreements. She wanted to control our guest list. Can you believe it? As if paying for something gives you a say in how it's used." The ballroom had grown much quieter. Even those who had laughed earlier now seemed uneasy with this level of public mockery. "But don't you worry about old Eleanor," Mark's voice carried across the now silent room. "After tonight, Chloe and I promise we'll never have to live as modestly as she does. We'll make sure her sacrifice really pays off. For us." That's when it happened. Arthur Vance, who had been sitting motionless throughout Mark's entire performance, suddenly lurched forward. His champagne glass hit the table with a sharp crack, the liquid spilling across the white tablecloth like a stain of blood. "Stop." The word exploded from him with such force that Mark physically recoiled from the microphone. "Give me that microphone." The ballroom fell into a stunned, absolute silence. 300 guests turned to stare at the distinguished businessman who had just interrupted the groom's toast with shocking intensity. Mark stood frozen, his cruel confidence instantly replaced by confusion. "Uncle Arthur, what's..." "The microphone, Mark. Now." Arthur's voice carried an authority that was absolute. Mark's hand trembled as he passed the microphone to his uncle. The bravado that had carried him through months of tormenting me evaporated in an instant, completely extinguished by the cold fury in Arthur's eyes. Arthur rose from his chair with deliberate grace, his movements commanding the attention of every person in the room. When he spoke, his voice held the moral weight of a lifetime of earned respect. "There's something you all need to know." The silence in the ballroom was total. The waitstaff stopped clearing tables. The guests held their breath. Even the musicians had fallen silent, sensing that something profound was about to happen. Arthur's eyes found mine across the crowded room, and for the first time all evening, I saw something that looked like recognition. Something that looked like respect. Something that was about to change everything. Arthur held the microphone with a steady hand, but I could see the raw emotions simmering just beneath his composed exterior. The ballroom remained frozen in anticipation. 300 guests, sensing they were on the verge of witnessing something extraordinary. 32 years ago, Arthur began, his voice carrying clearly through the sound system. There was a terrible house fire on Elm Avenue, right here in this city. A few of the older guests nodded in remembrance. I felt my stomach clench as memories I had spent a lifetime trying to suppress came flooding back. The acrid smell of smoke, the piercing wail of sirens, the terrified cries of a child. A young husband and wife died in that fire, Arthur continued, his eyes never leaving Mark's face. They left behind their 2-year-old son, who was trapped on the second floor as flames consumed the staircase below. Mark's face had gone deathly pale. Chloe reached for his hand, but he seemed frozen, unable to process what he was hearing. The fire department hadn't arrived yet. The neighbors stood on the street, watching helplessly as the house burned, knowing a child was inside but powerless to reach him. Arthur's voice grew stronger, infused with a new passion. But one person, a complete stranger, heard that little boy's cries and didn't hesitate. My own hands were shaking now. I could see that burning house as clearly as if it were yesterday, the orange flames licking at the broken windows, the desperate sound of a child's voice calling for help that wasn't coming fast enough. This stranger ran into that burning building without a single thought for her own safety. She fought her way through the smoke and the heat, found that terrified child, and carried him out to safety just minutes before the entire roof collapsed. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Several people turned in their seats to look at me, the pieces of the story beginning to click into place. That stranger suffered severe burns on her hands and arms, Arthur continued, his voice thick with emotion. She spent 3 days in the hospital. When she was finally discharged, she asked only that the child be placed with family who would love and care for him. Mark was staring at his uncle now, the dawning of recognition in his eyes like a terrible sunrise. That 2-year-old boy grew up to become a successful man, surrounded by people who cared for him, never knowing the name of the hero who had saved his life. Arthur's voice broke slightly. That child was you, Mark. The words struck the ballroom like a physical force. Gasps echoed from multiple tables. Mark's champagne glass slipped from his numb fingers and shattered on the marble floor. And that hero, Arthur said, his eyes finding mine once again across the room. The woman who ran into a burning building to save a stranger's child, who asked for nothing in return, who for 32 years never spoke a word of her own courage, is Eleanor Croft. The silence that followed was deafening. Mark stood frozen, his face a maelstrom of confusion, recognition, and dawning horror. Chloe had covered her mouth with both hands, tears streaming down her face. I sat in my chair, feeling the weight of 300 pairs of eyes on me, remembering that night when I had simply done what anyone would have done, what I would have hoped someone would do if my own child were in danger. I had no idea, I said quietly, but the microphone picked up my words. I never knew that little boy was you, Mark. Mark's legs seemed to give out from under him. He collapsed into his chair, his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking with what I realized were gut-wrenching sobs. 32 years, Arthur continued, his voice now carrying the full weight of moral judgment. For 32 years, this woman has carried the scars from saving your life. And tonight, I have watched you mock her, humiliate her, and treat her like a burden, the very woman who gave you every single breath you have taken since you were 2 years old. The crowd had begun to stir, whispers growing louder as the full, shocking implications of the story sank in. This opulent reception, funded by a hero's sacrifice, the cruel jokes, aimed at the woman who had risked everything for a stranger's child. Every dollar this woman spent on your wedding, Arthur's voice rose, filled with righteous anger. Every sacrifice she made, every humiliation she endured from you, she did it for the same reason she ran into that burning building 32 years ago, because that is who she is. A woman who puts others before herself, even when they are utterly undeserving. Mark looked up, his face streaked with tears, his eyes finally meeting mine across the ballroom. In that moment, I saw not the cruel man who had tormented me for months, but the frightened little boy I had carried out of that burning house so long ago, and despite everything, my heart broke for him. Mark rose from his chair on unsteady legs, his face transformed by the crushing weight of the truth. The cruel confidence that had defined him all evening was gone, replaced by something raw, broken and real. He started walking toward me, each step carrying the burden of months of cruelty as he finally began to understand. The 300 guests watched in absolute silence as he approached my table. "Eleanor," his voice cracked. "Please, please, forgive me." I stood to meet him, this man I had saved as a child, and who had tormented me as an adult. Seeing now how that scared little boy still lived somewhere inside the successful businessman. "You didn't know, Mark," I said quietly. None of us knew the connection, but I should have known better anyway. His words came in a frantic rush, tears streaming down his face. "You gave me everything. Your money, your savings, your dignity, and I threw it all back in your face. I treated you like you were nothing, when you were, when she was everything." Arthur's voice boomed from the microphone. "The only reason you are alive to be standing here tonight." Mark dropped to his knees in front of me, this proud, arrogant man, humbling himself before the entire gathering. "I don't know how to make this right. I don't know how to take back the things I said, the way I treated you." I reached down and helped him to his feet, feeling the eyes of everyone in the ballroom on us, watching this unexpected moment of grace and redemption. "You stand up," I said simply. "You be a better man than you were. That's how you make it right." Mark nodded, wiping his eyes with the sleeve of his tuxedo, then turned to face the crowd. His voice, when he spoke, held none of the arrogance from his earlier toast. "I need that microphone back," he said to his uncle. Arthur handed it over without a word, a mixture of pride and pain on his face, as he watched his nephew begin the long journey toward becoming the man he had always hoped he would raise. Simon took the microphone with shaking hands. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice was rough with emotion, "everything I said earlier tonight was wrong, worse than wrong. It was cruel and ungrateful, and completely backwards." He turned to look at me, his eyes still shining with tears. "This woman, Eleanor Croft, is not just the mother of my beautiful wife. She is not just the generous soul who funded this incredible celebration you see around you." Mark's voice grew stronger as he spoke, finding its footing in this new reality. "She is the reason I am standing here tonight at all. 32 years ago, when I was just a toddler, she risked her own life to save mine. She ran into a burning building and pulled me to safety, bearing burns and scars that she carries to this day." Murmurs of amazement rippled through the crowd. Several guests had begun to applaud, but Mark held up his hand. "And how did I repay this incredible heroism? By spending months treating her like she was beneath me, by mocking her sacrifice, by humiliating her publicly, by making her feel small and unwanted at her own daughter's wedding." His voice broke again, but he pressed on. "The woman who saved my life had to take out a loan to pay for my dream wedding, and I thanked her by treating her like a joke." Mark turned toward me again, his voice carrying across the ballroom with a newfound strength. "But that ends tonight. Right here, right now." He raised his champagne glass, which someone had quietly refilled. "Ladies and gentlemen, raise your glasses. Not to me, not to my new wife, not to our happiness." 300 guests lifted their glasses as one, the crystal catching the light of the chandeliers like 1,000 tiny stars. "Raise your glasses to Eleanor Croft." Mark's voice rang with genuine heartfelt emotion. "The woman who gave me life, not once, but twice. Once when she pulled me from that burning house, and again tonight, when she showed me what true grace looks like by forgiving someone who didn't deserve it." To Eleanor, the cry rose from every corner of the ballroom, followed by thunderous applause as 300 guests rose to their feet, a standing ovation for a hero whose courage had taken 3 decades to be properly acknowledged. I stood there, overwhelmed by the sudden reversal, surrounded by the same people who had witnessed my humiliation, now celebrating my vindication. But the real gift wasn't their applause. It was seeing my daughter's face, shining with a new understanding and an immense pride in her mother. Chloe made her way through the crowd to me, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Mom, she whispered. "I am so sorry. I am so proud of you. I love you." As I held my daughter close, surrounded by the celebration my sacrifice had created but was finally invited to truly enjoy, I realized that sometimes the longest and most painful roads lead to the most meaningful destinations. The final toast of the evening belonged to truth, to justice, and to the quiet power of doing what's right. Even when no one is watching, even when it costs you everything, and even when it takes 32 years to be recognized, it is always worth the wait.